call this meeting of the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee to order. Chair Nuri Martinez is out ill today, so I'll be chairing the meeting as vice chair. Also present are my colleagues Mitch O'Farrell and Paul Krikorian, so we have a quorum. Let's begin with item number 1.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Rafael Prado with the CLA's office. Item number 1 relates to Department of Water and Power report in response to motion Martinez, O'Farrell, Ryu, relative to the Metropolitan Water District's rate-setting practices, approaches, and related matters. You have staff from Department of Water and Power, Richard Harrisick and DeLon Kwan.
And if we could have Department of Water and Power staff come up to make a presentation. And I'd like to say that I spent 2 years as a board member on the Metropolitan Water District, and the sort of Byzantine way that Met handled its finances was always shrouded in Met staff secrecy and double talk, which was a little troubling to me, to say the least. So I'm pleased our chair introduced this motion. I wish she could be here today to hear it, but we appreciate her efforts. So if we could have the presentation.
Sure. My name is Richard Harrisick, Senior Assistant General Manager of Water with the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. We prepared a report based on the motion by Councilwoman Martinez back in June, requesting our department to report on MWD's rate-setting practices and approaches. And so we were asked to come and answer any questions that you might have on that issue. So we don't have a presentation on this. We have the report that was submitted back in June, July timeframe, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
DeLon Kwan with the Water System, Manager of Resources Development.
And if we could hear your presentation, that would be
Well, for
great.
the first item on MET's rates, we don't have a presentation. We're just asked to come and answer questions, if you have any.
Well, I have a couple. One is, it looks like this staff report on this item was either written by Met or at least taken from their materials almost exclusively. Also, there's a cursory review of their website shows that it appears at least $250 million of Met's unrestricted reserves of $380 million, which is stated on page 5 of the DWP staff report, is borrowed. So it seems that that is important information to be noted, but wasn't. Am I correct, and is there a reason it wasn't included?
So the item in the report on page 5 at the bottom requested, as of the June 30, 2017 fiscal year, what the amount of reserves were in Met's unrestricted reserves. So we were responsive in our written response to the council motion to identify what that amount was. So of the total that was in the Met Rate Stabilization Fund and Revenue Remainder Fund, that amount, $380 million, came from MWD's financial budget information. And then it was also asked what was the minimum reserve requirement that was set by the Met Board, and we were responsive in that question in identifying that it was $250 million, along with a target reserve established by the Met Board at $600 million.
So what do we think about their the health of their reserves when we note that most of that is borrowed money?
Well, I mean, Met's reserves are there for a reason, and primarily it's to help stabilize rates. When there are expenditures that come up that are potentially unforeseen, for example, if there are drought response actions, such as a couple years ago when the governor had his state mandate for the state to reduce water use by 25% and to achieve a 50 million square feet turf removal goal. Met was there for the region to help support funding for the turf removal program. Met put in to assist the region in, I think, in excess of $450 million, which was unanticipated. Majority of those funds did come from reserves to help achieve that drought response program to help support a turf removal program that, just within the city of LA itself, we our turf removal program removed just about 50 million square feet just within the city itself. We had achieved the governor's goal just by within the city of LA's efforts in our turf program. So in terms of the reserves, when they are used up due to unforeseen situations, Met has a process where they adopt their rates and budgets. They look at reserve targets that they need to hit. They account for future revenues based on assumed sales. They factor many things, including necessary projects that they have to invest in, for example, repair and refurbishments. They factor all those in their rates and charges, establishing what the rate increases are needed to support those investments. So all these factors, including replenishment of reserves, goes into Met's establishing funds for those accounts. In terms of Met's rating by the credit rating agencies, I think they're pretty high, and it's a result of these financial metrics and policies that Met has that they've been able to maintain a high credit rating, which then helps their lower debt service costs, and then that eventually has a benefit to LADWP ratepayers as we purchase Met water.
One other question. Now, we've taken the cost of restoring the Bay Delta out of the water fix budget. But I'm assuming those costs associated with solving the problems in the Bay Delta continue to increase in the future for Met. So how are those costs factored into our rate structure going forward? And don't we wind up paying for them pretty much in the same way?
So going forward, Met does have a long-range finance plan that looks out 10 years into the future. So they kind of have a crystal ball. They kind of look at what expenditures are coming in the future. Certain repair and retrofit projects, they have an aging infrastructure, also very similar to LA. So there's obviously planning ahead to invest in those types of projects. I can say, I think with the current Met 10-year forecast looking out 10 years from now, they are estimating on average about a 4.5% per year increase each year that they anticipate to cover these future expenditures that they're anticipating. And one of those expenditures is the Cal Water Fix. So based on the current estimates on how much Met's share might be as part of the water fix contribution, based on their currently assumed share of that cost, they did factor that into that 4.5% on average rate increase going out 10 years.
Now, I'm just asking if there's really any difference in what we're going to pay to restore the Bay Delta by taking it out of the cost of the tunnels, or was it just done to make the tunnels look like a less expensive project?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if the cost of the Bay Delta, so if the Cal Water Fix does not go forward, obviously that 4.5% will be less. But currently the 4.5% is inclusive of a potential fix and Met's obligations of the water fix costs.
Other questions, members?
I do.
Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things. One, directly on rates, and I don't know if Dr. Pickle might want to chime in on this too, but let me know. But right now, DWP water rates treat MWD costs as a direct pass-through. Is that correct? Is that right? So in the event that MWD should, I don't know, have some catastrophic costs, make a series of bad investment decisions, treat other member agencies in a way that's disparate to DWP and adverse to DWP's interests, what are the what is the insulation that will allow protection of DWP's water ratepayers for decisions that are made outside of DWP's control by MWD?
Well, we do kind of pay we do pay volumetrically for the amount of water we use. So we, in one sense, can control the bill that we receive from MET by reducing our use of MET and reliance on MET.
Clearly.
So one of the side benefits of the mayor's plan of us reducing purchased imports by 50% will result in our water bill, if you will, totally as a city to be less reliant on MET, and the prices will go down. Obviously, we also have membership on the MET board and can influence rate actions in that regard as well.
And clearly, as a city, though, we don't control the decision-making of MWD. We don't have the level of authority in the board to be able to do that. So to me, there's a bit of a disconnect in having a direct pass-through, because decisions get made by an outside agency that might not be in the best interests of DWP ratepayers. And unless there's a check on that within the DWP, I don't know. I mean, where is the vehicle by which we can protect our ratepayers when we see decisions that are made outside of this city's control that directly impact that? Maybe Dr. Pickle, you might want to speak to that.
I'm only going to make it more challenging.
Good.
A single-family residence in the city also pays for MWD costs through property taxes. And that current rate is at 0.0035% per year. And the MWD has the ability to change that through various governance processes. But that has to be voted for all of its members. So we may be 20% of the vote, but we wouldn't be the only one concerned about that.
So, well, and those property tax revenues, by the way, are disproportionately borne by City of Los Angeles residents, just because of the higher property tax, the taxable assessed value of Los Angeles properties, I assume.
Correct.
Well. Okay.
Councilmember, so the Met Board, we do have representation on the Met Board. We have 5 directors there that are appointed by the mayor. We have a 20% weighted voting on that board. So all the actions, whether it's adopting rates, implementing new programs, it is a board action of the member agencies. At staff level, DWP, we are the city's member agency representatives at MWD, so we do engage on a regular basis with the other member agency managers. They include the other GMs of other water agencies that represent the water agencies. We have monthly meetings at MET that talk about issues, challenges at MET that get talked about at the manager's level, and then ultimately what comes out of that deliberation at the manager's level then makes it up ultimately on important issues. Sure. Gets it up to the board level. So that's kind of the assurance we can at least convey to you, that there's staff engagement at MET constantly throughout their process, whether it's rate setting. So
I get that, and I don't mean to suggest that there's not a strong relationship between DWP and MWD. I don't mean to suggest that MWD's leadership is going to go rogue in some way and do something, wildly out of line with our interests. But it's more a question of governmental accountability. And when we have a direct pass-through system, our ratepayers are directly impacted by decisions that are made that our municipal utility is not controlling. And I think that's what gives me a little bit of heartburn. And that's why, again, I think to your point, that the reduction of reliance on imported water is so vitally important, and it becomes even more so because of this, the fact that we have no control over the costs of not no control, but no direct authority and control over the decisions that are made with regard to this source of imported water. And yet our ratepayers must bear that cost. So that was point number one. Related to that is I just wanted to ask sort of generally, the MWD's IRP and the water surplus and drought management plan and a number of lots of other things have all talked about the importance of local groundwater storage and how we encourage local and regional storage and so forth. And, you know, one of my pet issues for many, many years has been trying to maximize the utility of the San Fernando Valley aquifer, and the fact that we have massive amount of water storage that's underutilized now because of contamination and, in my view, lack of will. What can you tell me about MWD's partnership with DWP in ensuring that we maximize the utility of local groundwater storage and local stormwater recapture to recharge that aquifer, consistent with the sort of policy objectives that are contained in the in MWD's IRP?
Well, and Delon will add, but one not direct way, but to maximize the utility of the San Fernando Basin is MET's assistance in funding water recycling programs has traditionally really been part of the backbone of our ability to finance those programs. And as we move on into the future of our water recycling program, we're going to be more and more going off of the purple pipe type projects and going for direct potable recharge products where we're going to put water, where we're going to treat the water and put it in the basin. So we have projects lined up right now to do just exactly that. And MET's assistance programs will help us fund to get to that point. But to your point, and I just came from a meeting with the Director of Superfund at EPA Region 9, and we spent all of an hour talking about how to clean up that San Fernando Basin, you know, quicker, cheaper, and faster. So we are,
great.
Just to the greater point, kind of the MET out of it, I just want to let you know that we have, you know, 4 projects teed up right now, actually going to construction within a number of weeks for one of those 4 cleanup projects, and they'll all be done within 2025 range. And so part of our plan looks directly at utilizing to the maximum extent that San Fernando Basin.
Great. The contamination issue is a discussion for another day.
It is.
But I just wanted to kind of highlight this point because both for purposes of this item on rate impacts and the rate relationship with MWD and also on our next item, as our state is planning its capital investments relating to water supply, it could not be more crystal clear to me that the best bang for the buck is in cleaning and recharging our groundwater reservoir, and rather than shipping water 500 miles to Los Angeles. So we'll discuss that more on the next item, but I think that covers my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, one thing I'd point out from having served on the Met board is that San Diego had the same frustration, and having no other avenues, they actually have had an extensive and expensive lawsuit against the Met board, even though they're one of the members. So I wouldn't under any circumstances deem that as advisable, but they've had those frustrations as well. We have one speaker from the public on this item, Dr. Tom Williams.
Good afternoon. Dr. Tom Williams, Sierra Club, and a few others. Basics. I'm a geologist. I've done a geological study in the Sacramento Delta and Benicia, and the adequacy of the current studies is totally irrelevant. They aren't there. So expect major problems with collapse and breakage during an earthquake or during just normal settlement, maybe even during the construction. So based upon what I've seen in 1 minute, think of a 300% increase in the cost per person here in LA. I live in LA now, not in San Francisco. So I'm quite concerned regarding the whole rate structure and whether there can be a contingency limit placed upon our rates from MWD. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to continue at the request of the chair this item until, I believe, our next meeting, which is September 19th. So thank you for your presentations on this item. Item number 2.
Item number 2, Mr. Chair, members, relates to Department of Water and Power report as well as Office of Public Accountability report relative to an overview and financial analysis of the Bay Delta Conservation Project, the water fix, and related matters. You also have staff from DWP, Richard Harrisick, DeLon Kwan, and Dr. Fred Pickle from the Ratepayer Advocate's Office.
All right, thank you, sir. And I want to thank this committee for putting into context the basis of the recent motions and why we were requested to prepare a response. And you have before you our submitted presentation on the California water fix. I first want to go over several points before I'll turn it over to DeLon to go through the presentation. The city's long-term vision for a reliable water supply over the next 20 years includes reduced reliance on imported supplies through additional local resources development. And many of these local resource projects are already underway in the areas of conservation, recycled water, stormwater capture, and groundwater cleanup. And really key to this strategy for local supply development is to access to a reliable backup supply and supplies during dry periods when local supplies are less available. So the city's primary backup supply is the Delta, and in recent years, over 70% of the city's water supply has come from the Delta. So ensuring the reliability of this supply is key and is a key component to the city's strategy for local resources development. So I think it's important for me to highlight two historical impacts to the city's water supply that have led us to this long-term vision. So just during the course of my career, half of the Los Angeles aqueduct has been reallocated for environmental enhancement in the Mono Basin and in the Owens Valley. And just 2 years ago, as a result of the drought and our environmental commitments, Los Angeles aqueduct deliveries came in at under 40,000 acre-feet, and that's the lowest in history, meeting only 7% of the city's needs. Additionally, groundwater basin contamination has cut our local groundwater supplies in half. So consequently, the city now relies on MWD for more than half its water supply in an average year, and more than 70% during the drought that we just were presented with. And again, most of that water comes from the Delta. So recovering groundwater supplies and developing new alternative local supplies to replace reallocated Los Angeles aqueduct water will take years, if not decades, and is going to require significant investments. But to that, we are committed. Our current urban water management plan shows that our local supplies by themselves will not be sufficient to meet all the city's future demands, especially during dry years like the ones we recently suffered through. If we are successful in reaching our local supply goals, the city will still have significant dependence on imported supplies, primarily from the Delta. So, for example, if I could meet all the local supply development goals we've set ourselves for 20 years in a single day today, and the city were to experience a dry year, I'd still be purchasing 45% of the city's water from MWD, and most of that would be coming from the Delta. As a result, we anticipate that local resource development and the California water fix would be complementary and critical to ensuring the reliability of the city's water supply and water quality. And they should be viewed as not competing with each other, but complementary to each other. So the ability to produce water from the Delta is currently facing many risks, including earthquakes, levee failures, ecosystem declines, sea level rise, climate change, and fish restrictions. which, if ignored, will have serious impacts on the city's water supply, reliability, and economy. So there is an opportunity now before us with the Cal Water Fix to see how long-term sustainable solutions in the Delta will address water supply reliability, flexible operating in a dynamic fishery environment, improve water quality, and reduce the risk from seismic activity and climate change. So local resources development, groundwater remediation, stormwater management, and environmentally sustainable Delta water supplies are critical and, again, complementary efforts needed to ensure the city's water supply. Again, the Cal Water Fix should not be seen as an alternative to local supply development, but is complementary to that investment in the reliability of the city's principal backup supply from the Delta, which the city ratepayers have been relying on and financing and financially supporting for the past 50 years. Now, there are, however, still unanswered questions regarding some of the significant issues associated with the financing and governance of the Cal Water Fix that will have significant potential to impact water rates to the city's water ratepayers. So while I'm up here to say that water reliability is of extreme importance, so is the ability to afford it. So these and other concerns will be presented in the presentation at the conclusion, which I'll summarize. So the motion is timely as the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California is calling a vote from its members on the Cal Water Fix on August 26th. And the presentation that we're going to show you today contains slides from MWD, and you might take exception to some of them, but it's important that we believe you see the issue as it's being presented to other elected officials in the Southland so that you too can provide a voice for Los Angeles. We'll note when those facts and opinions of MWD are presented in the presentation. So with that, Delon Kwan of my Water Resources staff, who helps manage regional water supply issues regarding to MWD, will go through the slide presentation.
And I think you mentioned the date August 26th. Did you mean September 26th?
September 26th. Thank you.
Okay, so our presentation today is going to cover quite a bit of information in response to the motion. So it's going to take roughly about 15 minutes for us to go through the presentation. So I'm going to be covering DWP's responses to the 4 items listed here that you see. First, starting with an overview of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, then subsequently the Cal Water Fix project. We'll give you our perspective on how we see this project as it relates to the Mayor's Sustainable City Plan goals, and then subsequently give you an update on the latest activities at MWD with respect to this project, and then conclude with some discussion on possible considerations and next actions with respect to the project that your committee can take. So as a quick reminder, this map of California shows you where the city's water supplies comes from. For the imported supplies, we have our LA Aqueduct supply that conveys supplies to the city from the Eastern Sierras. We also buy our supplemental imported water from the Metropolitan Water District, and they get their supplies primarily from the State Water Project System from the Delta, shown there in the red circle in Northern California, and that system is managed by the State Department of Water Resources. MWD also imports supplies from the Colorado River, which is managed by the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. The remainder of the city's supplies comes from local groundwater, stormwater capture, recycle water, and our conservation efforts. So the Delta is an important part of California's water supply system, and on average it provides drinking water to roughly about 65% of the state's entire population, or roughly about 25 million people in California. And just from a perspective standpoint, state's current population is a little bit over 32 million. This supply also makes up about 30% of the water supply for Southern California, and it also supports the irrigation of half of the nation's fruits and vegetables that are grown in California. The Delta is also an important ecosystem that supports and is the home to over 750 plant, bird, and animal and fish species. This slide shows you how the water supply, shown here in the blue lines to the north and throughout the middle part of the image here of the Delta, moves from north to south through the Delta. You see there the city of Sacramento is there towards the top. The city of Stockton is to the right. And roughly about half of the annual total runoff flows that go through the Delta goes to the Pacific Ocean. The other half, about 20% of that, are Delta exports, and MWD has roughly, I think, about 5% of that 20%, and the remainder of that 30% are upstream and in Delta consumptive uses. So the Sacramento River is the main supply of the flows into the Delta from the north. The San Joaquin River, shown here, is the other main source of supply into the Delta from the southeast part. And then you see here at the southern part of the Delta, at the bottom of the slide, the State Water Project, or SWP, and then the Central Valley, or the CVP, export pumping facilities. So once the supplies from the Delta makes its way to Southern California via the State Water Project, I want to show you where the water then gets delivered to. So this is a map of MWD's service area here, covering the 6-county region: LA, Ventura, San Bernardino, Orange, Riverside, and San Diego County. And it covers roughly about 5,200 square miles. So MWD's two main supplies are the State Water Project, or SPW, from the north, and then the Colorado River Water, or CRW, that comes from the east. And the large arrows there kind of show, the large kind of orange arrows show the direction of flow as they enter into MWD's region. The blue shaded areas are areas that are historically areas that have been able to receive blended water being State Project water and Colorado River water. So the green lines there you see and then the green shaded areas here shown are the exclusive State Water Project areas. So essentially what that means by exclusive is it only receives that one supply, and there's no blending. So if you look at the upper right area there in the red circle, it shows the northwest sections of the San Fernando Valley where it only receives State Water Project supplies when we buy it from MWD. So exclusive areas are not a majority, but they do make up about 1/3 of MWD's demands. And then the west branch of the State Water Project has the majority of the exclusive areas, just in the way how the system is plumbed. This is a close-up view of the prior slide of the State Water Project exclusive areas within the city of LA. The red circled area is, again, the San Fernando Valley area. And you can see the 30 communities that are dependent on exclusive State Water Project supplies. Local groundwater and then supplies from the LA Aqueduct make up the remainder of the supplies that serve this area. So as a result of the recent drought impacts in the state, and then to better adapt to a changing climate, Mayor Garcetti had recognized the need for the city to have a sustainable future and reduce its dependence on purchase imported supplies from the Delta and the Colorado River. And he set forth a series of initiatives to achieve that reduction through increased local supply, development, and also improve on water use efficiency and conservation. So moving from left to right shows you kind of the timeline. Back in 2014, the mayor issued his Executive Directive number 5, and then subsequently followed by, in 2015, the city's first ever sustainable city plan that essentially established the goal, established 3 main water resource goals. The first is to
Thank you.
get the city's water use per person per day down to 98 gallons per person per day by the year 2035. That's a 25% reduction from the 131 gallons per person per day that the average person was using in 2014. You also note in his Executive Directive number 5, he had a 20% reduction goal, which we also achieved earlier this year in January. So in just 3 years since he issued his directive, the city was able to respond and achieve a 20% reduction just in 3 short years. The second goal is to reduce the city's purchase of imported supplies by 50%. And then the third goal is to achieve a 50% source local water goal by the year 2035. DWP had also updated its urban water management plan. You see there on the far right that essentially developed a 25-year resource management strategy to achieve the mayor's goals. And we're going to accomplish that by doubling the amount of our historical total conservation savings that we've been achieving to date. We're also going to increase our recycled water deliveries by 7-fold and double our stormwater capture amount by doubling or even tripling the amount of capture. And then cleaning up the contamination in the San Fernando groundwater basin is also a key element that will support the additional groundwater replenishment project and also our stormwater capture efforts. So this slide's kind of a little tough to see, but this is a pie chart that I want to show kind of how the city's been impacted over the years in terms of these dry year conditions. So the recent drought had reduced the city's aqueduct supplies, as Rich had mentioned earlier, and as you can see, we purchased a significant amount of the city's supplies from MWD in the pie chart here to the left, which represents the last 5 fiscal years from 2012 to 2016, where the city was about a 50% dependent. It has a 54% dependence on state water project supplies. Local supplies over the last 5 years had total about 16% coming from groundwater and recycled water. If we included the effects of conservation, that adds about another 15%. So we're at about 31% if you count conservation, recycled water, and groundwater made up our total local supplies. By the year 2040, which is this pie shown here in the middle bottom part, under average hydrologic conditions, we plan to change that around. And you can see the significant reductions in the city's dependence on supplies from the Delta, down to about 5% there on the state water project side. So quite a significant reduction from the 54% where we are today. And then on the Colorado River supplies, down to about 6%. And then local supplies will increase by about 3-fold compared to where we are today. So as Rich had mentioned earlier too, we do want to note that in future dry years, which is this pie chart on the right, where we're going to see potentially significant reductions in LA aqueduct supplies, it's projected to make up only 7% of the city's supplies when we experience those dry years. So when that occurs, we're going to still need to rely on supplies from MWD to meet demands, and you can see the kind of light blue area there that represents the state water project supplies. We're going to be about 39% dependent on that supply in those dry years. So this kind of highlights what Rich had mentioned earlier on kind of the all of the above diversified water supply strategy that the city needs. That includes local supply development, as well as supplies from the Delta during dry years. And then more importantly, that they don't compete with one another and that they actually complement each other. And that's kind of an often misunderstood kind of concept.
So just to chime in here, so top left is where we were, not counting this banner year that we've had, where we were the past 5 years. So very dry, not a whole lot of water coming down. On the Los Angeles Aqueduct, there was a 6-month period where we brought not a single drop down, so we were buying a lot of Met water. The bottom middle is where we're going to be in that time frame, looking out 20 or so years. We'll have a lot of local resources. That number there for the Los Angeles Aqueduct isn't an increase. It's basically holding to our historic exports from the Owens Valley there. Very little reliance on Met, either from the State Water Project or the Colorado River Aqueduct. But again, it's important to note that even once we get there to that future, or even an improved view of that future, still in dry years where we don't have any reliance on our own aqueduct system, we still need a source coming in from the outside. Certainly within the next 20 to 30, 40 years, you're still going to need that basically that insurance policy.
Quick question, Richard.
Yeah.
Do these pie charts take into account expected population growth?
Yes, it does. So if you look at the total production underneath there in the future years, you see where we, okay, so for example, on the left where we are today, that represents obviously the population today.
That's the growth?
So you can see in the year 2040, total production to meet demands, we're looking at about 675,700, and that's as a result of population growth in demands associated with that.
Actually, can I just one quick follow-up on the total production question? Why is it that for the single dry year pie chart we have a higher total production than for the average hydrology? I would think it would be the opposite.
So in dry years, actually demands do go up because of the hotter weather, so we see that effect right now. So it's mostly outdoor irrigation. Folks irrigate more, so cooling towers that need water for cooling towers.
Okay. Makes sense.
So typically it's about a 10% we see that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this slide came from MWD, and on average we want to show you kind of how the various regulations over time has impacted the combined exports, both on the state and the federal projects. So to the left you see back in the 1980s, combined exports from the Delta were close to roughly about 8 million acre-feet. And then where we are of recent, according to MWD's estimate, it's looking at roughly about 4.7 million acre-feet. So roughly about 60% of where it was back in the 80s is kind of where the exports are as of today. You see kind of a question mark here in the future on the far right, going out into the future. And this is primarily due to uncertainties to many factors that will likely affect exports, and these include potential future regulatory restrictions, effects from potential climate change impacts, whether there is going to be a cow water fix that exists or not. So in the next couple of slides, I'll kind of summarize a little bit more about the efforts to try to stabilize this further continuing decline on exports south of the Delta. So the Delta, obviously, you may know that it's located in an area where there are significant earthquake faults. There was a study that was done recently by the Delta Risk Management Study that estimated there's a greater than 60% probability of a greater than 6.5 magnitude earthquake occurring in this region by the year 2032. So what the study did is it looked at 50 levee break scenarios, and those are the breaks that you see there in the red dots here in the middle of the Delta. And when these levees fail, you're going to see a seawater intrusion from the San Francisco Bay to the left make its way from left to right inland to the islands. And here you can see the study also projected that there would be about 20 islands in the Delta that would be flooded. So under this scenario, without a cow water fix, the fresh water would essentially displace the seawater, would be displaced by seawater, and then the export pumps in the South Delta would essentially stop altogether, almost immediately disrupting about 30% of the supplies making its way to Southern California for quite some time. So either one of two things are going to happen should this scenario occur. Either emergency pathways constructed, or the levees are repaired and the system is flushed and returns back to normal.
So a couple of questions on that point. Wouldn't this also speak to the better possibility of us investing more in local water supplies so they'd be less likely to be affected by potential earthquakes in that area?
Absolutely. And we'll be doing that and have to do that because even if the cow water fix goes ahead right now, you're not going to realize a drop until 17 years from now. So we need to make those investments, and we are going to make those investments, one, to be less reliant, but also just to be able to survive during that period of time where we might be out of a Delta for 1, 2, 3, or more years. So that's going to have to occur in either event. But on a long-range basis, possibly there's a better fix to go along with those development of local resources.
And have we looked at the San Andreas fault where the State Water Project would be located as at least equally likely and equally disastrous result?
Correct. So to go to Councilmember Krikorian's comments on the San Fernando Basin, increasingly the San Fernando Basin is that much more important because of that risk of where we lie on that side of the San Andreas Fault, where you have a lot of that storage in the state system really not available to us, possibly in an event of a San Andreas event. So we have programs in place right now to basically stock as much water we can in that groundwater basin to get us through that 1, 2, 3 year period of time where we may be severed from the state system.
So we could invest in this whole project and still have it cut off by a severe earthquake in that area.
Correct. And so its benefits are in an earthquake scenario that wouldn't be reliant on the Delta surviving. So the Delta could crumble away and we could still get water. The more pointed question you had is once it gets to the San Andreas, and so we have plans along with Metropolitan. We actually have mutual plans together on how to deal with a break on the San Andreas, either to our own aqueduct or to the California aqueduct. So there's mutual aid agreements in there to be able to react to that as well. But it's a good point whether the damage happens within the Delta or actually along the aqueduct system.
So getting to the objective of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, its purpose was to try to propose some long-term solutions to address some of the conflicts in the Delta. And these conflicts included natural resources, infrastructure, and how to restore and protect the ecosystem health. Water supply reliability was a concern, and as well as water quality. So the alternatives that were evaluated against many criterias. The important ones essentially being their ability to reduce the take of covered species while not increasing the take of others, increasing conservation benefits to some covered species, as well as improving the supply reliability. So the BDCP proposal was going to introduce new physical and operational changes to the state water project system. You see here in this slide the various aspects that were summarized in the 16 alternatives that the EAR had looked at, the main one being the various alignments for the proposed conveyance system through the Delta, from the east and west canal tunnel alignments through Delta conveyance. They evaluated multiple diversion scenarios, as well as the BDCP, or the Bay Delta Conservation Plan at that time, also had a habitat restoration and protection component. This slide from MWD highlighted the BDCP, or the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, preferred alternative 4, shown here in the middle in the green alignment from north to south. You also see illustrations of the other alignment, alternative alignments such as the east and west canals and the through Delta conveyance that were also evaluated. So when the public drafts of the BDCP were released in 2013-2014 for public comments, the state received many comments and were considered by the state through the public hearing process. So in the end, when all the comments were received, there was enough concerns raised on a large habitat restoration program, questions raised on the effectiveness and the community impacts as a result of the project at the time. And then there was uncertainty regarding the issuance of a 50-year permit that would be sought under the BDCP, given the potential impacts of climate change. So the state subsequently had reconsidered the plan. So the state's new plan was announced in April 2015, and it was now bifurcated into two programs, the big program being the one on the left for the conveyance infrastructure part of the project, now called the Cal Water Fix. And then the Habitat Restoration and Protection program would now be implemented under the Cal Eco Restore program that you see there on the right. So some of the elements of the Cal Water Fix objectives you see there listed there on the left under the Cal Water Fix. Objective to protect the state's supplies through Delta system upgrades, restore habitat, about 15,600 acres, but this is habitat related to the construction and the mitigation efforts that they would need for the construction of the conveyance tunnel system. And the funding for the conveyance tunnel would be funded by water contractors. They would be solely paid by contractor funds, not from the state. So on the Cal Eco Restore program, it's a different approach to improving the ecosystem and restoration. It's different from the BDCP. It does have a goal to obviously support and the health of the native species there. The initial habitat restoration area is currently at 30,000 acres to achieve that in 5 years, with the idea potentially to provide more as the program continues to develop. And then this would require a broader public funding mechanism to pay for these improvements. So I want to show you here the physical features of the preferred alternative 4A of the Cal Water Fix. This is very similar and a carryover from the BDCP preferred alternative 4 for the water fix. So the overall distance is roughly about 43 miles of the main tunnel conveyance. You have 3 miles there in the north tunnels. In the north part of the delta, you'll see the 3 new intakes located roughly 5 miles south of Sacramento. The North Delta, you got the North Delta tunnels there that then combine the flows from these 3 intake locations, and it'll make its way into the intermediate forebay. The center of the project there, you see the main tunnels, and these are the 2 40-foot tunnels, 150 feet deep that you've heard about. And in the south part of the delta, you'll see the new Clifton Court pumping facility to lift the tunnel deliveries from the existing forebay that will then feed the export pumps to the Banks pumping plant on the state side, and then the Jones pumping plant on the federal system side. So this is a slide from MWD also showing the estimated supply, benefit, and reliability, both with and without a Cal water fix in place, looking at combined state and federal exports. Starting from the left, you see under existing conditions today with the existing regulations, roughly about 4.7 million acre feet is the combined exports. Now going into the future without a Cal water fix, and this is with projected additional fishery restrictions, predominantly from trying to prevent reverse flows on the old and middle rivers. You see a decline without a Cal water fix of exports getting to about 3.5 to 3.9 million acre feet. Now the column on the right shows a future with a Cal water fix under kind of those same regulatory restrictions. So with the fix in place, the ability to respond to some of those future restrictions. You can see the range of exports there with the water fix ranges between 4.7 to 5.3 million acre feet in exports. Now this is a slide that's received much debate at the Met Board, ranging from the assumptions made for the future without a water fix. Again, there is that uncertainty what future regulations might be imposed as a result of a changing climate that may be imposed by the state. And this is at least an attempt to try to answer that question, but just keep in mind that with the future uncertainty there, this is just an estimate. So folks can say, well, it should be more restrictive, it should be less. I mean, there's kind of no answer there, so you have to kind of start from somewhere with kind of the best information you can have right now in terms of forecasting where that future scenario might look like in a world where there may be a fix there or there may not be a fix to help kind of adapt to that future condition. This is also a slide from MWD that kind of shows the key milestones that are part of the Cal water fix. The ones that are listed to the left under the summer of 2017, most of these, I believe, are near achieved, if not already achieved. You see at the very top there the biological opinions that were recently received from the fishery agencies was kind of a major milestone to kind of get the project going based on initial operating criteria. I believe the state is also pursuing, if not they already have the CEQA approvals. And then the remaining permits and the Delta Plan certification, I believe it's making its way to getting completed. Later part of this year, the 404 Clean Water Act permit with the U.S. Army Corps for construction is going to also have to be obtained. And then I want to just bring to your attention here, this is another point that has been brought up in the Met Board discussion. The State Water Resources Board permit to issue for the new diversion intakes. The hearings are going on right now, and it's anticipated that it won't be until in 2018 sometime before this permit is issued. Why is that permit critical? The new intakes are important because it potentially could dictate further how the new facility is going to be operated with respect to minimizing take of the protected species. So that is one unknown that's out there now that is at least a year out from potentially being issued. This slide shows the rough cost estimate you've probably seen before, the roughly $15 billion for the capital cost to construct the conveyance system. The associated environmental mitigation that goes with the construction is roughly about $800 million. So combined cost in 2014 dollars was 15.74 billion. When you scale that back, when you scale that up to today's 2017 dollars, this is where you get the total 16.7 or roughly $17 billion capital cost for the construction and associated mitigation with the conveyance system. So I mentioned earlier the cost is going to be shared by water contractors. So this pie chart kind of shows you how the $16.7 billion is going to be split up between the federal side and the state side. Federal side is shown there in the green. That's the Central Valley project. They'll have roughly about a 45% share, equating to about $7.5 billion. On the state side, they'll pick up a 55% share, roughly about $9.2 billion. Now, one item to note, the 45 to 55 split right now, it's based on a principle, kind of a starting baseline point from which each side is going to start negotiations within their own, with their own contractors. So there have been questions raised during the Met Board discussion. So what if on the Central Valley project side you got contractors there and ag contractors that opt out, that don't want to pay? And I believe Dr. Pickle's report does address that scenario too in his range of analysis on potential impact to ratepayers. We don't know because the negotiations are still ongoing. So how the final share of the cost between the state and the federal side ends up being, we don't know until all these negotiations are done. But right now, as a starting point, it's a 55-45 split between the state and the federal. And then when you look at Met's share of the state side, they have roughly about a 46% share. Or if you look at the overall total, they have about a 26% share. So MWD's share will be about $4.3 billion. We've also looked on a very high level. So what would that cost share mean to DWP ratepayers if we looked at that into the future, if we're successful in developing local supplies and reducing our dependence on Met? The range you see here is driven primarily due to hydrology. So in average years, when we are successful and buy less Met water, we're going to buy less Met water, so our share of the Met cost would be less on a volumetric basis. So to a typical single-family customers, residential customers bill, we're looking at in the future roughly about 60 cents more per month on a customer bill. And then in those dry years where we are dependent on that supply from MWD, we can see that costs go up to roughly about $2.50 per month on a customer's bill. So I want to show you this chart too. This is important, and it also was another topic of many discussions at the Met Board. So who's going to design and build it? Who's going to oversee it? Who's going to manage the risks? And this proposal at the state level is to have a joint powers authority, which will in essence be a public entity. And this JPA is going to essentially oversee the design and construction of the Cal Water Fix. It's going to have a single purpose. It's going to be under contract to the Department of Water Resources, and this JPA will essentially oversee the day-to-day operations during the construction. You can see here it does report to the State Department of Water Resources. Under the JPA, there will be a program director that reports to the JPA. Program director will have oversight over these 6 functions that you see here at the very bottom, ranging from the financing and accounting aspects of it, all the way to a program manager team that will be managing the construction, to also looking at safe and risk management, dealing with uncertainty, dealing with issues that come up during construction to try to keep costs minimal and stay on schedule. Now, the question that has been raised at the discussion at the Met Board, including questions that have been raised by our directors that are appointed on the Met Board, have to do with the governance structure of the JPA, the decision-making authority. So this is another area that has some uncertainty or some concerns that still, or questions that still need to be answered with respect to how the JPA is going to function. So this is the last slide. It kind of shows you the recent activities at the Met Board, and you can see the 3 meetings that the Met Board had related to the 3 items here related to the Cal Water Fix. They talked about the infrastructure, the operations, and the finance and cost allocation. What is coming up at the current time is the September 26th board meeting for action. Now, there is not a published board packet yet on what that action is, but we believe that the items that will be coming to the board will be related to MWD taking a formal position to support the Cal Water Fix. There will be the multiple agreements related to the JPA that will be coming to the Met Board to approve and adopt, and for Met to participate in the JPA. And I believe another action will be to then request the Met Board to start issuing or for the JPA, once it's formed, to then issue debt to start implementing the project, the early phases of the project.
So I just want to make some concluding statements and summarize benefits and uncertainties. So obviously you've heard throughout the presentation the main benefit being to reliability in terms of water supply and water quality under a wide range of scenarios, whether that be a reduction of potential impacts from climate change, sea level rise, and seismic risks. It also just protects the investment that the city of Los Angeles has made over those 50 years. I mean, we help primarily fund that project because of our size within MET, and it just provides a lot of operational flexibility. Now, as to the uncertainties, they are significant, and just in conclusion, I'm going to use basically the main comments that our Los Angeles MET directors have given MET, but basically they're all a bunch of uncertainties and unanswered questions that we've posed before the MET staff, and are requesting answers to those questions. So we don't have what exactly Metropolitan is going to put before our Met directors on the 26th of September. Hopefully if we come to this committee again in a number of weeks, we'll be close to that time and be able to put under you exactly what they're asking for us. But to summarize some of the unanswered questions and concerns and uncertainties, there is that governance aspect. So they've laid out a plan for a Joint Powers Authority to construct it, but have not yet put forth if there will be a JPA, and if there is a JPA, what it will look like in terms of operating the Cal Water fix. So there's just a lot of concern about who has the authority during operations, who is represented on that JPA, the liability that comes back to MET in terms of that, and just how it's created, whether it's by state statute or agreement or what have you. Project cost and allocation are obviously the big thing. So there's this existing split between the federal government and the state government, and the estimates on cost are based upon how it's laid out now, with MET having 26% of the overall cost. But it could go higher. There's no certainties as to whether the federal side will pony up to that 45%. Within the state, there's no assurances that all 55% of those represented on the California aqueduct system now would come to the table on the California water fix. So it's likely that it could go much higher if those negotiations don't pan out with that assumed 26%, limited to 26% input by MET. There's some technical issues that go on with this, and basically they kind of come to the point of GMET, it appears as if we're going out based too much on speculation of what's going to happen here in terms of what the permit requirements are going to be, whether you can even get permits to do this project, and yet you're asking us to commit to a project, commit to funding possibly, to go with going out on speculation on that. And so there's just that overall risk. So basically what the MET directors have had in taking the position is there needs to be more time to evaluate this. We spent 10 years to get to this point, a whole decade, so what's the rush on waiting a small period of time after that? And possibly with that, because there may not be answers to all those questions, but what are the assurances of any kind of off-ramps that if things do go sideways and get to the point where we may want to turn around, what's the criteria before us, Metropolitan, to us, Met directors, of what those off-ramps look like and what kind of assurances that we can have there. But there's also the flip side of the uncertainties of the future without the California water fix that also need to be before our eyes that, okay, if not this, then what? And so that's a great uncertainty with that. So with that, that took twice as long as the 15 minutes as promised, but something that has been this long in the making, maybe it deserves that amount of time. So we'll take questions.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask first that we take some testimony from the public.
That's good.
I think our time is tight, so we'll keep it to 1 minute per person and around 15 minutes or so of testimony. So we're going to bring people up 4 at a time, so I'll ask staff to step down and then come back when we are asking the questions. First 4 speakers, Esperanza Vielma from Restore the Delta, Ernesto Pantoja, apologies for mangling your name, from Laborers Local 300, Doug Obeji from NRDC, and Ernesto Medrano from LA Building Trades. Esperanza, would you like to start?
Good afternoon, committee members. Again, my name's Esperanza Vielma, and I'm the Environmental Justice Director for Restore the Delta, and I'm here to enter our comment letter regarding the OPA analysis for the committee into record. We dropped off copies at your offices yesterday. Our letter documents the OPA analysis of WaterFix as exceptionally limited in its value, since it omits key information about a variety of risks, including regulatory risk, risk with the Central Valley project participation, water payment discounts for industrial ag at Los Angeles ratepayer expense, and heavy reliance on metropolitan export water in dry years when water is the least available for everyone in California. By using a median to analyze costs, the OPA has failed to show how much California WaterFix will cost the Los Angeles ratepayers, especially the environmental justice community. Please ask for a full comprehensive analysis from the OPA office before making any decisions to support the California WaterFix.
Thank you. Ernesto?
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Ernesto Pantoja, here on behalf of Sergio Rascon, Business Manager of Laborers Local 300. And we're here not only to ask for support for this project because of our members that would gain work up north, but the reality is when you look at our current water situation here in Southern California, there aren't enough funds to build the infrastructure necessary for either stormwater capture or even water treatment plants. I know my brothers and sisters in the trades would love to build those water treatment plants, but in reality, LADWP is right. You need to have a two-tier fix. You need to do the Bay Delta plan. It needs to go through as proposed, because you need that alternative until we have enough resources to build the water treatment plants that'll clean enough water to provide us. Otherwise, how are you going to replace the water that we already need from that's coming? I mean, we all want the treatment plants, but let's do this now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ernesto?
Good afternoon. My name is Ernesto Medrano with the LA Orange County Building and Construction Trades Council. And in the building trades, we know more than anyone else that water doesn't start at the faucet. It's not magic. LA imports water from hundreds and thousands of miles away. At certain times of the year, as much as 75% of water supplies for residents and businesses in Los Angeles comes from the Delta through the State Water Project. This system is antiquated and vulnerable to earthquakes. Can you imagine millions of people going without water after a natural disaster? We have to secure water supplies for families in Southern California. We can't conserve or develop our way out of this challenge. We still desperately need to invest in our conveyance system. It is the only way to make all these local solutions work most effectively. So on behalf of our members who live and work in LA and their families and communities, I urge you to support the California WaterFix. And I also have letters from the State Building Trades Council I'd like to provide to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug?
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Obeji. I'm a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Unfortunately, NRDC strongly opposes the California WaterFix. I've spent the last 9 years of my life working on this project. 3 primary flaws. First, WaterFix is actually worse than the status quo for the environment. So if you're worried about seeing declining water supplies from the Delta in the future, WaterFix increases that risk, doesn't reduce it. Second, the notion that LA and everyone else is going to do all of the above is really a Trumpian fantasy. We can't afford to pay for all of the above. And OPA's analysis depends on the investments in local supplies so that we reduce reliance on investments in imported water, but it doesn't actually account for the costs of making those investments. We have to make choices, you have to make choices, we have to make smart investments. OPA's analysis is not a credible analysis of the likely costs, particularly under the baseline scenario, because the CVP is not going to pay 45%. We're going to see declining yields from the Delta, and we need to invest in the local supplies that the mayor's plan and LADWP want to do. That is our reliable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next four speakers, Daryl Gale, Andrew Kratzner from BOMA, Dr. Thomas Winningham, and Keith Campbell.
Good afternoon. I am continuously baffled by this proposed water tunnel. Why should we pay more money here in Southern California and not get any of the water? Why aren't we promoting local long-term sustainable solutions like rain barrels at every and water infiltration systems at every apartment building, business, home, and parking lot? Why don't we capture and clean the water we already have, like the San Fernando Aquifer? What about lots of local jobs repairing and improving our local infrastructure, these broken, leaking pipes bursting regularly? It seems like we could keep a lot of trained workers busy. I used to work at LACMA, where Stuart Resnick donated $27 million. If he wants more water for his very profitable farms so he can donate more to other art museums, well, then he can pay for the water fix.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Andrew Kratzer, and I'm here representing the Building Owners and Managers Association of Greater LA. We represent over 150 million square feet of commercial and industrial space throughout LA County, and we support California Water Fix. LA depends on clean drinking water to sustain our homes and businesses. During a drought, when water from other sources dries up, water from the Delta will ensure that LA has clean water. Water Fix will cost the median household an average of just $1.73 per month, a small price to pay for water security. Water Fix is both affordable for businesses and residents and essential to guaranteeing water supplies for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Williams, I think I actually called a different person with a similar name, but I'll take you now, and I'll take him with the next batch.
Okay. Dr. Clyde Thomas Williams, or Tom Williams, Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. The most reliable water is the most local water. Most jobs come from most local water, not from 40-foot tunnels in the Delta for LA. So there are alternatives. Right now, the Department of Water Resources is reviewing all of their regulations regarding indirect and direct potable water reuse. That is, the 2 million gallons that just went out through the ocean outfall from Hyperion to Santa Monica Bay. A lot of that could be kept, could be stored in our groundwater, and would provide local jobs for local people and be cost effective. Right now, Water Fix won't fix anything.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Keith Campbell. I grew up in the East Bay on the Delta in Pittsburgh, California. I spent most of my life, more than 30 years in Fresno, which is the heart of Central Valley agriculture that feeds much of the nation. And now I live in downtown Los Angeles, and I love it here. I'm also a water resources engineer, and have spent my 33-year career studying water management and how water is used in California. The Delta water is the lifeblood for most all Californians. The California Water Fix allows enormous flexibility to operate the state and Central Valley water projects in order to protect the environment. That flexibility does not exist now. This is good for the environment. As far as the affordability questions, in my opinion, we can't afford not to build this project. It is much less expensive than all of the alternatives that have been mentioned today. If we could simply capture all the stormwater in Southern California, we would still not have enough. Also, that would take away from the environmental benefits that stormwater flowing into Southern California rivers provides.
Thank you.
So, I support the project, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next four speakers are Jessica Sulans, Gary Tobin from the LA Area Chamber of Commerce, Reverend Clarence Moore from the LA Ministry Forever. And Dr. Thomas Winningham. Jessica, would you like to start?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having us. And I wanted to thank Councilmember Kretz and Krikorian for their pointed and very necessary questions. Thank you for that courage. I also wanted to thank the council members' staff. I'm with Food and Water Watch and also a constituent of District 13. For your time this week, we gave you questions, we gave you information from a consumer watchdog point of view that's looking out for your constituents. So thank you for your time in having us. You have our questions, you have the facts of our rebuttals for this project. So what I just wanted to point it out is that this project supports the giant triplets of neoliberal industry, big oil, fracking companies, big agriculture, and big banks. Goldman Sachs has signed on to this, and we know about the Resnick family and their cash crops of almonds and pistachios in the Central Valley, which should be a desert, but aren't because of water that comes down from the Delta. So we know in this day and time that those industries are not for us to support, so I hope you continue to stand with your constituents against this project.
Thank you. Gary Tobin.
I'm Gary Tobin with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to draw attention to page 21 of the report that you just went over, where the conclusion is that the water fix is affordable to city single-family residential households at less than $2 per month. And then attached to that is a document that I'd like to share with you that shows some of the relative costs between the California water fix and some of the other alternatives that we're considering. And if you look at those numbers, you'll see that recycled water costs 3 times as much as the California water fix, and distributed stormwater costs 5 times as much. We need the California water fix to be a part of our strategic plan for water in Southern California. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Moore.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm president of the Los Angeles Ministers Forum, which is about 22 churches, and we constantly deal with families, low-income families who can't pay their utility bills. They have really issues, and we support them. We're very concerned about this California water fix. The cost, $2, just $2 to a low-income family is a lot of money. I had the opportunity to visit one family, and because of one of my members had asked me to go and help provide food for them. And I saw a lot of cat food, but I saw no cats. So that really concerned me. So people are struggling, and you have to really consider their welfare. An increase would be, I think, a real big disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Winningham.
Hi, Tom Winningham with Ground Game Los Angeles. I'm also a resident in CD 13. Everything in that PowerPoint presentation was about how importing water is a bad idea and we need to do something else. And yet, Met is asking us to pay for the most expensive water project in California state history to import water. Even by their own estimate, it's the most expensive. With financing and operational costs, the total price tag is estimated to be closer to $67 billion, not 16. And that's our backup. That's the thing that we don't want to have to use. Met has no financial commitments from any of the other stakeholders, which will leave DWP residents and customers on the hook for, at a minimum, estimates are $100 a year, high end up to $400 a year for decades. And that's just absolutely unacceptable. It's not good for Los Angeles. They themselves admit that LA will see no additional water from this project.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Shane Phillips with Central City Association, to be followed by Robert McDuff from the Sierra Club, Armando Flores from Valley Industry and Commerce Association, and Connor Everett from the Environmental Justice Coalition. And I apologize, at that point we will be out of time, so we will put everyone else's requests on the record. Let's start with Shane Phillips.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Shane Phillips, and I'm Director of Public Policy for Central City Association, an organization representing over 400 businesses and nonprofits in LA. We're here to speak in support of California Water Fix, and specifically...
Could I ask for quiet in the room from everybody else?
Sure.
Please go on.
Specifically to talk about why we view it as a complement to local investments and not a competitor. First, Water Fix is an insurance policy that lets us continue investing in local improvements without fearing the worst from threats of drought, climate change, and natural disaster. We're very supportive of water capture, storage, and recycling, but the Bay Delta is a critical backstop for helping us through prolonged drought, where local measures can't always substitute for imports. Second is that beyond the low average household cost confirmed by the OPA last week, the cost for Water Fix actually adjusts as demand for imports goes up or down. That means we're still incentivized to upgrade our local water infrastructure and continue cutting demand, while maintaining the insurance policy we need against extraordinary drought or disaster. The two approaches are complementary. CCA has been a longtime supporter of California Water Fix, and we hope that this committee will also support our region's long-term water security through this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert McDuff.
I'm Robert McDuff. Thank you, committee members, for hearing these testimonies. I'm a resident of Angeles Vista, a neighborhood of LA. I've been a Sierra Club member since 1970 and currently sit on the LA chapter water committee. I'm here as a concerned citizen. I'm also a former engineer and corporate treasurer. I'm concerned about the financial impact that this tunnel project would burden the residents of LA with. We've heard previous testimony that people are struggling, and this is only going to make it worse. People have to have access to clean, affordable water. It's a social justice issue. I view this tunnel proposal as a remake of the original peripheral canal proposal from when I was in high school back in the 1970s. It was a bad idea then, except this one is even worse. The current EIR is inadequate. It's going to pull water away from the delta before it even goes through and is able to flush it out. It's going to supply it to big ag interests in Central Valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Armando Flores.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Armando Flores, Legislative Affairs Manager for the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We represent more than 400 businesses and nonprofits in the San Fernando Valley and throughout LA County. VICA strongly supports the California Water Fix. The Ratepayers Advocates analysis found that the Water Fix would cost the average Los Angeles household less than $2 per month. This is in line with MWD's own estimates for costs. The California Water Fix is the most cost-effective alternative, as it is roughly half the cost of other large-scale local water supply projects. The Water Fix will support efforts to increase local supplies by providing high-quality water that can be recycled over and over again and meet local demands and replenish local groundwater basins. It will also provide Los Angeles residents with water during drought years when the city's own supplies are diminished. California Water Fix is an important investment that will ensure the reliability and quality of water for businesses and communities, and Los Angeles would benefit tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you. Connor Everts.
First, I want to thank all the people who took time off work and came to speak today and won't get a chance. If they'd like to stand up, I think it's a shame that they didn't get to. But I know we can talk about this issue forever. I've been working on it for 40 years. This is the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee. This only increases the amount of energy to bring a small portion of water, if any, to Southern California. It increases the climate change impact for the amount of energy it takes to pump it over the Tehachapis, and it does not address the environmental justice issues in terms of either water quality or jobs. So I strongly urge you to take this opportunity to turn down the so-called water fix and let us do what we've already started to do and we have a history of in LA, far more than Northern California, which is to do more with less, as we will need to do, as we've had the wettest and the driest in the last 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all of you who came to speak, those of you who we were able to hear from, and those of you who we will record your interests for the record. If we could ask staff to come back up. And I don't think we heard from the ratepayer advocate, so if we could start by asking for his opinion, that would be great.
I'm Fred Pickle, Executive Director, Office of Public Accountability, Ratepayer Advocate. Our look at the rate impact of the water fix on the city of LA is measured two ways. We call the total impact the surcharge, and that consists of two components from the perspective of single-family residents. First, the impact in water rates, and second, the impact on property tax. This analysis is not a cost-benefit analysis or a cost-effective analysis. It does not attempt to place a value on the reliability-based benefits, nor does it analyze the financial differences between imported water purchases and local water supply. The state CEQA and related environmental studies have opined about the water fix investments economic beneficial nature based on improvements in reliability and the quality of water deliveries. We're not attempting to repeat that. What we are doing is trying to allocate the costs projected for their water fix and track those costs through the costs of the state water project, through the Metropolitan Water District, and track them to taxes related to MWD paid by LA customers and by the impact on LA DWP rates. There are a lot of uncertainties in these costs. For example, the capital cost estimates we've looked at have ranged from roughly $17 billion to $26 billion. And that flows down to MWD. We also look at the allocation of the costs between the state water project and the Central Valley project, something MWD is uncomfortable opining on because it's handicapping negotiations they have to perform. So I get to be the handicapper. And then look at the impact on MWD, which is expected to absorb roughly 26% of the costs if Central Valley project pays its full share. And the net impact is $1.73 per month. But there are a lot of uncertainties in that $1.73 a month. This table looks at the extreme cases, and there's a huge degree of uncertainty in this project. The biggest question is, how do we reduce cost and risk in this project if it goes ahead? But let's get a sense of these risks first. One, we've assumed that the MWD property tax levy, the entire amount of 0.0035%, is used toward the water fix. That's probably not true. But we're doing it that way because it makes the expense higher. If we allocate all the cost to variable charges, the low-end cost in the best case where LA's local water supply efforts are most successful and the climate does not become more dry, goes down as low as 61 cents. But in our cases shown here, we're including the property tax levy is entirely covers, is used first in terms of the costs, and then the costs flow into the DWP volumetric water charge. At the other end, from the best case to the worst case, we have considered changes where the climate becomes drier. This isn't just a single year. This is not the dry year, wet year fluctuation, but there's this systematic change in climate. So it is drier. The capital costs are higher, and the Central Valley project is paying equivalent of what would be half of its share. So that's an overall pessimistic case, and there the total cost is $431. Now, mind you, in a world where the climate is drier and LA's local water supply efforts have not worked out well, we'd be happy to be paying that $431. But that gives you the range of risks in these supplies. And the keys to managing this risk are successful, cost-effective implementation of local water supply expansion. That's key to keeping our share of the cost down. And second, including the broadest participation in the water fix, and thus spreading the overall cost impacts from this project as widely as possible. LA has been well served by a diversified water supply for almost 100 years, and it doesn't hurt to keep that water supply diversified. Let's spend a couple minutes thinking a little bit more about these water fix costs and the degree of uncertainty. I've talked about water fix projected costs of 18 to 26 billion, and then there's also substantial uncertainty in future Delta water exports from as low as 3.8 million feet to 5.3 million feet. You'll remember those numbers perhaps from DeLon's charts that we went through a little bit early. 3.8 is a case associated with no impact from this project on decline in delta takes, and 5.3 is the most optimistic. We looked at the baseline split of costs between the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. The base assumption is 55-45, but we looked at scenarios where the Central Valley Project is paying in total less than half of its full share. In addition, depending on MWD's other water supplies and LA's water supplies, LA's dependence on MWD water, depending on climate, not wet year, dry year, can vary from 12% to 61%. One thing we didn't do is we didn't consider the dry years in this. Dry years are more expensive to customers, and we've learned recently our percentage share of water required from MWD can be even higher. Now, I've also covered the issues not included in this report. The total costs of water service are not included in this report. And I haven't talked about alternatives to the water fix because that's covered by the state project. In conclusion, the state water fix surcharges are affordable to single-family households in the city of LA.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues. First of all, you said you were using MET's calculations. Is DWP going to do any kind of independent calculations, or are they just going to? Are you all just going to rely on their calculations?
I did not say I used MET's calculations.
No, I believe the DWP reps did.
So from the standpoint of the cost estimates for the construction, the capital cost estimates, we can only rely on the estimates that are prepared by the state. I mean, these were done by multiple cost estimating consultants. We do not plan to go out and verify these cost estimates. I mean, through our representation at MET has done that already, and they've actually received several other estimates from other cost estimating consultants that kind of validated the range of the $16 billion cost range. So we don't see a need to further validate what's already been validated.
In terms of the cost of the project, we did our own analysis similar to what the ratepayer advocate did, and came on our slide 20 where we show the cost. Those are within the ratepayer advocate's range. So independently, we came up with the same number.
Now, I have some concern about whether all of the sources of funding for this project actually could pay for it. First of all, how certain are we that the agricultural interests that I think benefit the most by this actually will do some or all of their share to cover it? And even if they initially commit to it, how certain are we that they'll be able to honor those commitments?
So currently, those discussions are occurring. Again, there's a split between state and federal, and within each one of those buckets, if you will, is representation in there. So the assumption is that MET kind of stays pat with its 26% of the net that it carries on just the day-to-day operations. But as we indicated, that is one of the biggest uncertainties. To that, Metropolitan has said that if that number is different, if that 26% cost to Met and its member agencies goes up, that they will come back to the member agencies for reaffirmation if they still want to proceed with the project. And the issue with that is, well, how far down the line will the Met member agencies have an opportunity to do that? Will it be so far down the line that there'll be no point of return, or will there be some assurances given, again, as I mentioned, some check-in points, some off-ramps, if you will, that they would still be presented those increased prices if they do occur, but in a time frame where they can make a meaningful difference in their decision.
And I hope we'll hold Met to that requirement, because that's certainly a possibility. How about the federal government? We currently have a president that is unpredictable, to be kind. What if they decide 5 years from now just to pull out and eliminate their responsibilities? Do they have the ability to do that, or do we have a way to hold them to what their commitment is?
You asked me to predict the current administration's actions.
Well, I
although he did
I
say
think
5 years.
we've seen a certain amount of limited sanity, but it is a possibility of an 8-year administration. So I'm just wondering, legally, could they decide partway into it, hey, we're not going to follow up on our commitments, and you guys just pay the bill?
My answer to the previous question would hold on that as well. So there's two sides of the equation within the state governance structure and then within the federal. It's the same. It's the same. Comes down to the same 26%. If the Feds say, hey, we're only in this for half of it, and they push it off on the state, and the only people that are going to pony up is Met, then by default Met's cost of the project would come up.
Any chance that could happen when we've already partially built the project?
Well, that's the concern that we should have, that we don't get that far down the road where construction started, and we're still trying to figure out who's going to pay for it. So that's the type of assurances that we would like.
And our analysis considered the possibility that the federal Central Valley project would only take 30% less, and for its remaining volume would pay 30% less for the 70% it did take. And it looked at the cost impact if those costs were allocated across all other Central Valley, State Water Project customers.
So maybe, Dr. Pickle, it would be good if you go back on the slide on your worst case scenario and what are the main assumptions in that. So you've assumed that Met is taking a larger percentage of the cost.
The worst case, which is the $4.31 case, the project is assumed to cost $26 billion. The debt interest rates were assumed to be 7%. The share of the State Water Project volume that is 68% of the project, and the Central Valley Project rate is 70% of what others are paying. So it goes down that list of very bad scenarios, including a low overall water for the City of LA from City of LA supply. So it walks through down that whole list of the impact.
And Metropolitan's share under that worst case would be what? Greater than the 26% that they've...
Substantially greater than 26%.
And what about our share? I mean, if we are successful in reducing our water usage as the mayor's plans, and during good years our usage is very limited, and we only fund through that usage, how do we actually pay for that project if we're one of the big payers and we have years where we're only using 7% or 10% of the water?
We become the bad guy. But that involves long-term negotiations over fixed costs that are common in mega projects like this, and those negotiations will go on for the life of the project based on experience in other utility industries. We will always be fighting over the fixed cost share.
So if we wind up not using very much water, there'll be, I assume we'll be urged to renegotiate this somehow.
Or the property tax share might go up.
And I know we calculated percentages of water use from the state sources if we do the project. But what do we calculate that to be if we don't do the project? Presumably the water doesn't just disappear. We get some share of the water that's there. So in the pie chart that shows 39% for the state water project, if we don't do the project, have we considered whether we get 30% or 0 or somewhere in between? Have we looked at that figure?
Well, the assumption there that is whatever water is available in the state water project, Met still hangs on to their 26% of that allocation. The point of that is the reliability of that. So not necessarily the total volume, but when it's called upon that it's there. And that's the main point of that pie chart.
Do we have a calculation, though, for what we think that reliability would be? Do we think it could be 0? Or what do we think the minimum would be under any circumstance?
Well, that was the slide that shows the three pie, not the three pie charts, but the 3 bars, and it showed without the Cal water fix in there. Slide number 17. So that would be the total amount available to all of the contractors. And Met's portion
17?
would, yes. So that's the future without the Cal water fix. It's diminishing over time, and Met just has a percentage of that.
So, I mean, it doesn't look like that
maybe the long
terrible a number, frankly. If we greatly increase our local water supplies, going down from 4.7 to 3.5 to 3.9,
so again,
it seems like that would cover us without doing the tunnels.
So again, the issue is it there when we need it? And so it's not an average amount, but it is the ability to bring that water there when we need it. And so we have an increasingly unreliable system going throughout time.
But we don't have any way to analyze that, though.
Well, let me see if I can. So if that supply in the future where we need Met to make up 39% of our supply in a dry year, and if that Cal water fix is not there to ensure that reliability, the way how Met would respond to supply shortages, if the state water project or the Delta supply is not reliable, Met's going to look at what they've got in storage, what supplies are coming from the state water project, what supplies are coming from the Colorado River, and then the Met board will then assess in terms of how much supplies we've got in storage that can be drawn to make up the deficit. And if there's going to be a deficit in terms of not having adequate supplies to meet demands across all of Met's member agency demands, then Met's going to implement their water surplus drought management plan. And that plan is in place, and it's also called the Water Supply Allocation Plan. It's going to be based on needs, and it's a systematic approach to determine what the agencies need, and then to have that rationing take place to then where the entire Met service area would have to take cuts. So how deep is that cut? It depends on how much the shortage is. So, I mean, I guess there is a way to calculate it. We don't have the calculation. It just depends on where that future scenario is, how much of a shortage is the state going to see when that occurs. But there is a plan to determine and allocate in about as much of a fair process based on an agency's needs. And it's going to take into account, an agency's allocation in terms of, how much local supplies they have, how much conservation they have in place. So there's considerations to give agencies that do implement more conservation a more
share the
allocation.
allocation. So the flip side of reliability is then rationing. So the answer to the question is we'd be in rationing, and the question is that a long-term strategy that we want to be in.
Right, and we got through that before without a lot of local water sources. So,
well, the problem going in the future is that increased dependence on water conservation as a way of life will be put in place. So when called upon rationing, there'll be increasingly less and less opportunities for us to cut back because we will have at that point, maximize what we can conserve.
questions for other members? Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your reports and all your work on this. Question about the water fix program estimates. So in 2014, the estimate was that it would be at $15.74 billion, and then in 2017 dollars, it's $16.7 billion. If this were to move forward as is, and everyone was to get on the same page and it gets approved through the various processes, when would the soonest be that it could start? And at that point, what would the total price tag be? Is it going up about $1 billion every 3 years or so? Or can you talk a little bit about that? Future estimated increases in costs?
So I believe the cost estimate, the 15 point, the $1 billion cost estimate, there is contingency built in there. I think it's in excess of maybe 30% contingency, 35% contingency. This is going to be financed, so I did mention about the JPA that's going to be the issuer of this debt, and they're going to oversee that debt. So when you factor in, Dr. Pickle put in, interest rate assumptions, it's going to be more than, it's kind of similar analogy to a house. You don't, the cost of your house doesn't.
It's only going to go up. At what would be the soonest that something like this would begin? At what point would the financing package be complete and the project begin?
So my understanding is the issuance of these debts are going to be issued in series. So they're going to issue a first series of debt to get the project going. So there is still design that needs to be done. It's about a 4-year design process, and then somewhere along the design, towards the latter part of the design phase, there will be some implementation or start of the construction. So I see the potential action coming on the 26th in September, one of those debt issuance to get the project going, potentially for design services to start design of the project. So you can probably see some costs rolling in, and I believe it was captured in MET's kind of 10-year forecast, but it is going to ramp up over time. Mm-hmm. You won't see the full debt service effect peaking until at least probably a good couple years into construction.
All right, so timeline-wise, we're talking, I just heard 4 years just for a design phase once it's all approved.
Right, and then it's about 13 years for construction, so
okay. Over
the whole period, including commissioning, you're looking at about 16, 17 years to complete.
Right.
And we assumed the midpoint of the construction process. Our cheapest case was $17.7 billion in 2024 dollars, and $26 billion in the worst case, again in 2024 dollars. And our analysis was as of 2040, assuming the project would have been in service for 5 to 8 years at that point.
Mm-hmm. And would the price per ratepayer household be commensurate? Would it stay at $173?
That's $173 in 2017 dollars. To get the price in 2040, you have to inflate those numbers back to 2040. We used a 3% interest rate.
Right. So
this
again, this is also a 20. If it were 2017 and this were to move forward, it would be on average $1.75 per month. So we're talking considerable amount more once it's all said and done.
If you were to interpret those as 2040 dollars, the low end is 171, and the high end is 852.
Yeah.
But at the same time, income levels are likely to have gone up at that interest rates. Other costs will have gone up. Okay. So it's tough to make comparison in $2040.
Sure. And I hate to interrupt, but I am actually going to have to leave. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. O'Farrell, if you would chair the rest of this meeting. And I know we have a request from the chair to, at the end of the day, continue this item to the September 19th meeting.
All right, that's wonderful. Thank you. I'm good. I got this. Yeah. Yes. I might need the gavel, though. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. Okay, sounds good. Elbow. Thank you, Mr. Koretz. A few other things that are just related to the overall conversation about conservation, et cetera. One dynamic that's occurred in the last year is it seems as though LADWP is standing down on your purple pipe, your recycled water program. Can you talk a little bit about that and the reasons why? And I bring this up because of a project that was just completely halted in terms of getting purple piping across the river up into Elysian Park.
Correct.
Their staging was already taking place, and it seems as though a U-turn was made in terms of policy. And I just want to hear why that is, because it's all related in terms of growing our capability to use recycled water, growing our capability to tap into groundwater that hasn't yet been purified for other uses that don't need to be potable water. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the strategy has led to a policy of pricing out those purple pipe projects is basically to hold it around the cost of what we pay for Met dollars. So that's always been the marginal cost, but we add a little bit. So roughly you can think of Met water $1,000 an acre foot, and we basically set an amount of about $1,500 an acre foot of how we'll price stormwater projects, recycle water projects. The project for in Elysian, I think, was up over $4,000 an acre foot. So it was a little too rich, I think, what we could afford at this point, especially when we have a set amount of dollars to spend on those purple pipe projects. So we are pursuing the less expensive projects first on those purple pipe, with an overall strategy, though, of transitioning from purple pipe projects, say that 5 times real fast, into putting that recycled water into the groundwater, where we can then treat it going in, treat it going out, and put it in the system so everyone can benefit from that. And so we're going to be transitioning into projects like in the Sepulveda Basin, where we have a treatment plant there, and under our One Water alliance with the sanitation department, we're pursuing a project where we'll put water from the Tillment project into the San Fernando Basin. We will be looking for those same opportunities down at Hyperion to put another groundwater basins on the other side of the mountain there. So that's the direction that we're going. That's the direction the industry's going. Eventually, we hope to actually put that water then into the head of a water treatment plant and put it directly in the system and not have to put it in the groundwater and treat it going in and coming out. So that's the logic for that. And that allows us then to get greater gains in our recycle water project. Basically, the purple pipe projects that we have now have kind of taken the lower hanging fruit, and it becomes increasingly more difficult to cite those and pay for those as we go on.
My big concern is that we'll lose an opportunity with a program like this to become fully operational for recycled water for all of the city's irrigation. In other words, we need to get to the point where we're not using potable water for uses that don't require potable water. Even your cooling towers, for example, use potable water, right? I'd love to see what percentage breakdown of current uses for potable water where the uses don't require it, and vice versa.
Correct.
And then when in the future we think we can get to 100%. I mean, that should be a conversation we're having right along with this water fix.
Absolutely.
And just working closely with you on the whole Silver Lake Reservoir and using the non-treated groundwater to make sure that the reservoir has water indefinitely now, in perpetuity. That was a very creative, very low-cost solution, not to mention the act of God that we had 200% of snowpack. But those are, I would love to hear more conversation and more of a focus on those practical matters that Angelenos pay very close attention to as part of this conversation with how we move forward with water fix or what we eventually end up doing. I think that I'm not hearing enough of an emphasis on that since I've been on this committee.
Sure. So we've got much of that laid out in our urban water management plan.
Okay.
And with the soon-to-be-released One Water plan, you'll see those specific highlights coming out of there and the opportunities that we have, especially with, I mean, that's our closest one water tie with sanitation department. So within that document, you'll see all of those opportunities prioritized. There'll be some costing in there, and that'll be the appropriate time to talk about that.
And when will that one water plan draft be ready?
By the end of this year.
By the end of the year, okay. And there will be a presentation, I'm sure. Okay, that answers most of my questions. I have some concerns about the September 26th MWD board hearing, especially since everything is, in terms of what they're going to do is speculative and unknown exactly, what those repercussions will be for us. At what point are we going to know exactly what will be on that agenda, and when will we have a bite at the apple on that?
So what we'll do is we'll work with the chair's office on that, and understand that we'll tentatively be coming back on the 19th, and we'll work if there's a better time earlier or later, or in addition to the 19th, coming back as whatever strategic for that 26th meeting.
All right, and you've officially asked for a delay for the item. Did I understand that correctly?
The Met directors have requested from the Met staff that they delay that decision on the 26th.
Okay, so we need to keep pushing for that, of course. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think most of my questions have at least been touched upon, and in light of the fact that we're going to be continuing this matter, I don't know that I need to get into great detail. But let me just understand this timing issue first, because that's kind of, we were all in a bit of a rush to come to agreement on this. First of all, if this is continued until our next meeting, we still have a week or so for the council to act prior to the existing date for the MWD board's vote.
Correct.
So we should be fine there. And we'll have a better body of information upon which to base our decision, because we'll have their, presumably we'll have their agenda recommendations and so on by.
We would hope.
Okay. Now, one way or the other, though, regardless of what this committee and the council does, while that I'm sure will be informative to the MWD board, this council and its action does not direct the MWD directors one way or the other, right?
Not directly. It would obviously be good for them to carry, the will of the council into their
we would
decision.
hope so. We would hope so, but just, so that everybody's clear,
that's the
our
governance
decision
structure.
is not the last decision on this. That decision gets made by the directors rather than.
And I think it weighs in on Met management as well.
Yeah.
That's where their largest member agency stands.
So I think most of my questions for Dr. Pickle have already been exhausted. But I guess I want to offer a slightly different perspective than where this discussion has gone, because, you had best case, worst case scenarios, $1.70 something, $4. That sounds like a small amount of money when it's broken down per single family home. But of course, when it's extrapolated over a system, it becomes a very large amount of money. And I feel like where we are right now with what's before us should not be a decision of along the lines of, well, is that amount of money affordable or isn't it? And I think you touched upon this, Dr. Pickle, in setting out what your report does not include, and I make note of that, because that's not the decision before us. The decision is not whether even $4 is affordable. It's whether it's a good idea. And, there could be lots of ideas, lots of really good ideas, lots of ideas that maybe contribute significantly more to LA's water supply reliability for less than $4 a month per household. But we don't know that because we're not discussing that. And, Mr. Tobin presented pointed to some other alternatives, recycled water and some other things. But this is certainly not the exhaustive list of policy direction that we might take to ensure system reliability. And, I touched upon groundwater sources earlier, and I would like you to, and sorry to take up Mr. O'Farrell time on this, because I don't want to go too far afield from where we are, but this bothers me all the time, and hopefully you can educate me on this. because I'm not an expert on hydrology, so maybe you can help me. So with this chart, this pie chart, we're looking at 709,000 acre feet a year in the single dry year, the emergency year when we most need to rely upon MWD water, right? That's the point of that pie chart, is to show this is when we have to ramp up to almost 40% from the state water project to meet our needs in the single dry year. So as my back of the envelope math, that's about 270 or so thousand acre feet from the state water project and about 100,000 acre feet from groundwater or so in that. So I guess my question is why? If DWP has a 500,000 acre feet storage reserved out of 3 million acre feet in the aquifer, why would we only, in an emergency year, why would we only pull 100,000 out of what's essentially our emergency reserve?
Well, there's limitations to the amount that we can pump out within a single year, and so that's the limiting factor.
It's a pumping limitation. Just our pumping capacity is not.
There's two limitations. There's our adjudicated amount as an average that would not limit us in an emergency year, a dry year, but the amount that we can actually physically pump out through our pumping capacity, and those pumps are connected to our distribution system, and the distribution system has limits of how much pressure those pumps can push through the distribution system. Okay. So that's the overall limiting factor there. And depending on when that dry year happens in terms of how far we've progressed in cleaning up the groundwater basin, there's also a water quality that turns on and off wells, whether we're pulling it out. But it's a physical limitation there.
Okay, but I'm thinking about that because, we're talking about this investment in a major capital intensive project that will increase statewide potential supply over current conditions by, best case scenario, about a third. And I'm just wondering if for the same amount of money or less, we might not be able to improve that pumping capacity, improve our stormwater recapture, recharge that aquifer, get more capacity than what we have there now. We're talking about 2039. We've got 22 years to invest in better pumping capacity and better distribution capacity, and we could do that for a lot less than $4 a household, a month, I imagine.
So that's about twice as amount that we pumped in the 5 drought years that we had. So that does anticipate a significant increase in the amount that we can pump out, twice the amount within that 20-year period.
Okay. Well, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but
I think
when the report comes back,
you're on point for sure.
Because too often we try to make these decisions as though they're binary, and they're clear. This is not a binary choice. It's not we either do this or we do nothing at all. Just even if I put on my state legislator hat again, I did these things. I worked on the $12 billion water bond that we, tried to do a few years ago. And the Christmas tree ornament process that happens in the legislature where everybody says, well, as long as we're doing this, let's add a couple of billion more for my dam or for this or that. It's absurd. And soon it becomes not based on sound, thoughtful statewide policy at all. So clearly, I think we have lots of statewide capital needs that we have to invest in. Saving the Delta as an environment is one of them. Fixing the Oroville Dam is probably going to be one of them. Ensuring that the aqueducts are earthquake safe as much as they can should be one of them. There's a lot of things that we have to invest in, and this is only one of them.
Correct.
And I just don't know if it's the best one, or if it's the most important one, or if it's the first priority among lots of other things that we need to get done as a state. And I don't know if the state legislature or the governor are going to continue to think so, or future legislatures and future governors are going to continue to think so. So,
yeah, I would agree that it's not a binary decision, and that's in my opening remarks. I said it's a complementary position before us, that you can have both, and that both are part of the strategy, so it's not all or one or the other?
Except that there's a limited amount of money to go around.
Correct.
There's a limited amount of money statewide, and my constituents have limited amounts of money. And there's a crowding out process that happens when you tell them, don't worry, it's only $4 a month. That's great, except for the next time you come to them and say, I'm so sorry that our distribution system is broken, and we have pipes that are breaking under Ventura Boulevard, but it's going to cost a few bucks a month more to fix that. And then in addition to that, we say, I'm sorry, we're going to go for more recycled water, and that's going to be a few more bucks. That is not an endless process.
Correct.
And there is a direct sort of opportunity cost. If we do this investment, it means we're not doing other stuff. So as I sit here, I have not the first bit of reason to think that, after all I've heard, that this is the most important of those things to do. Maybe I'll be convinced, but as I sit here today, I'd like to know when you come back, maybe we can have a deeper discussion about where this fits in the DWP's water IRP, and what are some of the other things that we're planning to do, and what are those cost projections going to be, and because there's not unlimited elasticity to this.
Right. So my introductory remarks were reliability is important, but at what price reliability?
Yeah.
And that's the policy question.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that was
Good,
more
good
of a
discussion.
rant than it was a question.
I'm a water guy. We could talk all day. I have no problem.
But that being said, since we're continuing the matter anyway, I just wanted to get it out on the table so that when we come back and have a deeper discussion, these are some of the things I'm going to want to talk about a little bit more. So.
Yep. Now is definitely the time to put it all out there. Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. So we will approve the recommendation of the committee chair, and that is to continue the item until September 19th, when the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee meets again, and that shall be the order without objection. And that is the last item, and there are no comment card period has been closed, so we're good to go. That concludes the meeting. See you all on September 19th. Thank you.